Good evening, members, officers. Welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Call-in Committee, Monday, 12th of August. I'll begin with some apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Eyre, given that he is one of the calling-in members and he's substituted by Councillor Fisher. We've had apologies from Councillor Crawshaw and Councillor Coles, who are substituted by Councillor Jane Burton and Councillor Wilson. So welcome. Agenda item 1, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest that they wish to declare at this point? No. Thank you. Agenda item 2, exclusion of press and public. Members will be aware that the papers for this evening's meeting contain a confidential appendix. So I would ask for members' consent if the discussion moves on to discuss the items contained in that confidential annex for us to move the meeting into private session. Could I see an indication from members as to whether they would be supportive of that, should the need arise? Yes? Okay. Thank you. Agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of June 2024. Can I ask if any members have any matters of accuracy from those minutes? If not, I'm happy to propose them as an accurate record, if members are content. Thank you. Agenda item 4, public participation. There had been one person registered to speak this evening. Unfortunately, they're no longer able to attend. So we have no public participation. I did receive an email from a member of the public wishing to raise matters in relation to the original decision paper. However, the matters that were raised are not covered by the matters that are subject to the call-in. So I forwarded that email on to the relevant officer and asked them to respond. Okay, so we now move on to item 5, which is the called-in item relating to the decision made by the executive in July. Update on the housing delivery programme and the disposal of surplus sites. Members will have seen in the papers the call-in request and the comments from the monitoring officer in relation to various aspects of the call-in request, and members will be aware that this discussion will relate to a limited number of aspects of the decision made at that meeting, primarily relating to the proposed disposal of land at the Shambles and 22 The Avenue. So our discussion this evening will focus on those items in accordance with the council constitution. As I mentioned, when we have these call-in meetings, this is meant to be an inquisitorial discussion, not an adversarial discussion. And we're not here to debate whether we agree or disagree with the decision. It's about the basis on which the decisions were made. Whilst I'm happy to give members a degree of latitude in terms of setting the context for their remarks, if I could ask members to focus on the matters at hand that are subject to the call-in, as set out on pages 11 and 12 of the pack. So we've resolved to go into private session should the need arise. I would ask the calling-in member, when making their introductory remarks, if they can avoid making mention of any of the content of those restricted papers. Similarly, when the executive members come to introduce their response. When we move into the question and answer session, if members would like to ask questions either of the executive members or of the calling-in member in relation to the content of that restricted annex, if they indicate they would like to ask a question on the contents of that page, I'll make a note, and then when we've dealt with other questions, we can move into private session to deal with any questions relating to the detail of that restricted annex. So we're not saying you can't ask a question, but if you indicate that you do before saying it, then we can hopefully avoid any issues. So for colleagues who are not familiar with call-in meetings, the calling-in member will have 10 minutes to present their case. There'll then be 20 minutes for members to ask questions of the calling-in member. The executive members will then have 10 minutes to respond to the grounds for call-in, and then members will have an opportunity to pose questions of the executive members. If any issues come up on which the executive members would like to request officer support, then officers who are present are able to come and join us at the table. I'll then invite the calling-in member to have up to 5 minutes to make any concluding remarks. Similarly, the executive members will have 5 minutes to make any concluding remarks they wish to. I'll then invite comments and contributions from members of the committee. You will each have a maximum of 5 minutes to say anything you wish to say, but you're under no obligation to use all of that allotted time. And then we'll move to a vote as to whether members believe there has or has not been a breach of the decision-making principles. Okay, so I think we're hopefully clear about what we're doing. So if I can invite Councillor Eyre as the calling-in member to join us at the table, please. Welcome, Councillor Eyre. So you have 10 minutes to address the committee to set out why you believe the core principles have been breached in relation to those aspects of the decision that have been deemed suitable for call-in. And would you like a reminder at 30 seconds or not?
Thank you, Chair. If I last 10 minutes, I'll have bored myself. So
okay. Right, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would start by expressing my frustration at the limited scope of this call-in. Put simply, the paper brought to executive, disguised as an update on housing delivery, is nothing short of a fire sale of council assets with no information, no evidence, and no explanation. Some of the city's crown jewels are being sold either to the highest bidder or to the lowest bidder, with no rhyme and reason, without following either the council or this administration's policies, and without clearly articulated and transparent business cases. I don't accept the monitoring officer's reasoning that the Castle Mills, a site previously worth up to £8.4 million of value to the council, being given an exclusivity clause to a buyer for barely a fraction of that value, is not something that deserves further scrutiny. The decision to progress with that exclusivity clause should have been taken in the knowledge of both the likely outcomes of that work and all the potential options. For context, I have here 40 pages, and I've covered them, aware of audit and governance and making sure the camera can't see them, 40 pages of detailed valuations of that site and development appraisals. In your papers today, for each site, you have two figures in a table that bear little relationship to reality and see potentially millions of value wiped off sites, and yet the executive has agreed to allow a third party to go ahead incurring costs on the site without consideration of the figures, and the public had no opportunity to speak on why they are paying green bin taxes and increased council tax to subsidise those sales. Focusing on 22 The Avenue.
Oh, okay, I was hoping you would come on to those.
Focusing on 22 The Avenues as a starting point, a wise man once said, and I quote, "Public land should be used for public good and not seen as assets to be stripped or as windfalls. The housing charity Shelter sum it up better as part of their policy document on making better use of public land, which says that, at the moment, public land is sold to the highest bidder to deliver capital returns instead of being used to provide affordable housing and long-term revenue. Councils should use public land to ensure delivery of high-quality, locally affordable housing. 22 The Avenue is a public asset and could be better used as part of either the housing delivery programme or to reduce the city's housing waiting list." That was a leader of York Labour Group, speaking in favour of a call-in of the executive decision to sell the avenues. A call-in bearing the signature of the very executive member for housing, who is now sitting in the opposite chair, about to argue the opposite point. It was a call-in that was supported by one of the committee members who's not here today. As Councillor Crawshaw pointed out, clarity should be provided before taking a decision of how many genuinely affordable and social homes could be realised from this site, and of course that wasn't in the papers provided to Executive. 22 The Avenues had a long-term social purpose, and I'd ask you to give the option, the very least, the option to retain a social purpose in future. Options should be provided to the Executive as to how 22 The Avenues could be developed by the Council or the partner. I would imagine, therefore, this should be a relatively short and straightforward meeting tonight. Our members, I'm sure, will support the call-in, the Executive member supports it, and so does at least one Labour member who was not able to attend tonight. I suppose there is a question of what has changed in the interim. Well, in 2020, the decision involved replacing 9 beds at 22 The Avenue with 51 new specialist mental health housing places at Woolnow House and Dainby Drive. The Executive decision was clear: to approve the relocation of the supported housing provision at the council-managed 22 The Avenue in Clifton to the new provision, and the marketing for sale and subsequent disposal of that site following the development of the 2 specialist mental health supported housing schemes. Approve that once 22 The Avenue is vacated, it be sold, and the authority to proceed and complete the sale be delegated to the Director of Economy and Place. Since that decision, the new Executive has taken the decision to sell Woolnow House to a registered provider for housing, and 22 The Avenue remains in use today. Furthermore, since that decision, a new administration has been elected with a cast iron pledge to deliver 100% affordable housing on all council land. Given these changes, I think it is very straightforward that a full options appraisal and cost of business cases should have been undertaken. The 2 sites, 22 The Avenue and the annex, are of similar size and value, and the value of the site as a whole can only be impacted through piecemeal sale. Any options analysis should have included a comparison of relative business cases for 100% affordable versus market sale for both the whole site and the sale as 2 separate assets. Similarly, the properties on the Shambles, prior to recent expiration of the lease, these were all affordable homes. No consideration was given to their continuation as affordable homes. Officers have told me that no full valuation was undertaken as to potential users of this site, as the commitment was already made that these would go to market to the highest bidder. We do not know, therefore, what the case is for retaining these as affordable. 2 paragraphs and 122 words is the sole justification for selling these assets. Given their location, we all know around this table what these will be bought for. This is a conscious decision not to deliver 100% affordable on council land, but to flip affordable homes to luxury flats. Woolnow House and Sturdy Grove are sites of similar size to 22 The Avenue that have been progressed as 100% affordable housing. Nothing in this paper provides any evidence as to why the same cannot be true in Clifton as it is elsewhere. Elsewhere in the report, officers are clear that Castle Mills is too small, is not a priority, with many registered providers preferring to focus on low-rise housing and apartment projects out of town and city centres. Yet there we're bending over backwards at huge expense to the taxpayer. Why there but not in Clifton? This is why robust business cases and options analysis are essential for all sites. I therefore call on members of this committee to support Councillor Myers, Councillor Pavlovic and myself, and reiterate the comments of Councillor Crawshaw in 2020. It's not to say that the outcome might not still be to realise the asset. This call-in is seeking a greater clarity around the decision-making and a report which might set out a number of options available, such that it can be seen in public, and if that is seen to be the best option to go forward, then that's a robust decision that's been made openly and transparent.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. So, members, we now have a maximum of 20 minutes for questions to be posed to Councillor Eyre. Would anybody like to ask any questions of Councillor Eyre? Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hello, Councillor Eyre. The call-in has now been shrunk to only take into account 4C of the call-in, which is the business cases. I wanted to ask you about the Shambles, 28, 45 and 47, the Shambles. In your conversation with officers, either recently or prior to Executive or your previous time on Executive, was any consideration given to retaining the asset and renting it out in a similar manner to the flat above the Reading Cafe in Roundtrees Park?
There were certainly no conversations about selling the asset, and I was quite clear that we did not sell anything on the shambles. The housing association that previously had that area decided they didn't want to take those properties any longer, so they returned the lease. From that point on, it's a decision of the new administration whether or not they continue to use those as affordable housing, which is what they are or were at that time, or whether to sell them. I certainly would not have been supportive of market sale of those sites.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I was hoping somebody else had asked something so I could form the question better, but you said there was nothing in the papers that said that it couldn't be used, the same thing couldn't be done in Clifton and that it couldn't be used for affordable housing, but in the exact papers that we're referring to here, point 62 says the sentence, given the size and condition of the property, it is not considered financially viable for affordable housing. Does that not constitute a pretty clear business case that it isn't even viable to continue using it in that way, let alone?
I would not class a sentence in a report as a clear business case. As I said, I can't covering them over. 20 pages is generally the process that would go through. We pay people quite a little money to do those valuations. They go through each potential option, be that residential, be that affordable, be that student accommodation, be that hotel accommodation, and that gives you a robust sense of what is the value of that. When asked with officers, they said because the decision had already been taken that this would go to market sale, there was no consideration of affordable. That process wasn't undertaken because it's, in their view, it is not necessarily necessary to do that because you're not selling it for less than value. If you're selling it for the value of the property, then clearly the market will decide how much it's worth. It's for the executive to understand what the potentials are, as has happened with Castle Mills and that particular site there. There is a red line figure that we can't discuss yet that says if you were to sell this to a hotelier, that's how much it's worth. If you were to sell it to a student housing provider, that's how much it's worth. If you were to sell it to a house builder, that's how much it's worth. If you were to give it to an affordable housing provider, that's how much it's worth. And the executive took the decision based on that. And that's, as I said, there's 40 pages I've got. Councillor Pavlovic will have another 20 pages on top of that since the last copy I had that lets you know that information to make that decision. That was done on Castle Mills. That decision was taken. And as the report says quite clearly, because as you're saying, if that line in the report is enough, then the line in the report of the executive that says Castle Mills is not suitable for affordable housing would be a reason to sell that on the open market. That's why you don't do that. That's why you have the appraisals. Then having looked at those, you get to make that decision.
But paragraph 64 to beyond it talks about how the executive approved the sale of 22 The Avenue in the annex. This is an additional sentence to then say, and also, as has already been evidenced, it's not viable as affordable housing. It then goes on to say, the programme did not proceed due to the lack of interest from RPs. So for me, the business case is spelled out. I appreciate it's not a 20-page document, but the case for retaining it as affordable housing, it says isn't even financially viable. It's not even an option. The options were already explored for selling it in different categories. So I just, for that one, it looks to me like that is spelled out in those paragraphs. There's a common sense threshold that if it's not viable, it doesn't need to have countless hours of officer time, surely, to draw up more numbers to say what the art of the possible is when there's only one option available to us. Obviously, that work will then be done when they're selling it, right?
It's not countless hours. It's a professional opinion that tells you that's a change in value. As I've said, the decision has been taken to do 100% affordable on all council land. That didn't go through the business case process. That was just a decision the administration have said 100% affordable on all council land. So Castle Mills goes to 100% affordable. That didn't necessarily have the business case. This doesn't. Just having a line in suddenly saying, well, this one isn't affordable. Why? What evidence do you have as a member of this committee to say, well, why is Castle Mills affordable and why is this one not affordable?
This one says that it's not viable to be done affordably. That's the evidence in this paper. The work will have been done behind the scenes to justify that sentence.
That's not evidence, that's opinion.
So is that, do you have any further questions on
A
that?
separate one about the shambles, but I'll leave
I'll
other
come
questions
back
first.
to that. Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, supplementary, I guess. First of all, I think Castle Mills, if I'm correct, was a business case for spending a significant amount of money for the delivery of a new unit. So a slightly different thing to the sale of land. If I was to cast myself back to having written officer decisions and stuff back in the day that will come through your executive or come to the officer decision under you, fairly confident that a large amount of them won't have had a full business case in the types that you're written, talking about there behind it. Would you like to confidently say that you think all the decisions you made had a business case like that, or was that just specific to Castle Mills? Because I don't think you could confidently say that was the case based on what I've seen go through previously at these kind of decision sessions.
Yes, and if you look at the calling meeting in 2020, that information was presented, so I know the figures for 22 the avenues. I saw all of that.
Yeah, I'm not
Plus
saying
that was all
22
presented.
avenues, I'm saying all. You're saying this is all
On land sales, yes.
land sales.
In fact, when the asset sales were brought, we didn't bring it as a housing delivery programme update. We brought it as an asset sale. And I said at that particular calling meeting in 2020 that there should be transparency on all sale of council assets, which the committee at the time and the chair, Councillor Corshall, agreed. Sales shouldn't be done in this way. There should be a thought through process and a report to executive member, which did come about 3 months after that one, I think, that listed all the sites, all the potential uses and all the potential valuations. So yes, there always was a clear business case.
Thank you. Councillor Rose, back to you.
Yeah, moving on to the shambles. I mean, you said in your opening statement, given the location, we all know what it'll sell for. I mean, picking randomly what you can find online, the only building you can find that's been sold in the last 10 years in the shambles was £1 million. It was quoted in a 2021 article as the second most expensive famous street in the UK after Oxford Street. Why would that be the right place for affordable housing in the city? That's not to say that, you know, there shouldn't be affordable housing, but why would you not sell the shambles for affordable housing to make more affordable housing available in the city? It seems like a common sense business case in the context of what's written here.
There should be affordable housing everywhere. I think to make a statement that there should not be affordable housing on the shambles because it's worth a lot of money is quite a strange thing to say as a Labour councillor. I think I've been very careful of what I've said about social cleansing, but that in many ways is what is happening here. He's saying, well, actually, no, we don't want people in affordable housing living on the shambles. I don't agree with that. I think that should be maintained. And people should have the opportunity to live anywhere in the city that they want to, not just cherry-picked sites that various people have decided, well, that's okay, we'll have affordable housing there, but this one, no.
You're commenting on the decision and whether the decision is right or wrong. In terms of the evidence here, the business case is again self-explanatory. The value of the property is significantly greater.
The business case isn't just about pounds and pence. It's about saying, well, that is how much, so that's your starting point. That's how much it's worth for us if we just want to sell it. However, that's not what we are. We're not a private developer. We're a local authority. The value of it in terms of us, in terms of social value of maintaining that and actually having somewhere in the city centre where people can afford to live rather than being shunted out to whatever areas you've decided are appropriate for them. That's the flip side of it. And then you look at it and say, okay, there is a financial cost to the local authority of doing that, but is that worth it in terms of making sure there are affordable homes in the city centre? That's what's happening at Castle Mills. The decision has been taken to wipe millions of pounds off the value of that site to make sure that there are affordable homes there. You have to apply that policy consistently across. You can't just say, well, actually, yeah, it's okay on Piccadilly, but we don't want you on the shambles.
Councillor Widdowson.
Just going back to 22 the Avenue, reading the papers, it's being split in two and sold off in parcels. From your experience in that area, what do you think the impact of that is on the value of, if it went for sale, on the value of the sale?
Unless you have an agreement with somebody to purchase both sites on a staggered process, it's got to have a negative impact on the value of the property because whoever buys half of it, somebody else is not going to come along and buy the other half to do a completely different type of development. So if you have an agreement that you sell that half and then potentially the same purchaser of that half will come along later on and buy the second half when it becomes vacant, potentially not, but you're taking a huge risk. I mean, the value of the site is as a site on its own. As we said, the discussion about whether it was financially viable was based on 10 units were available across the whole of that site. So you've halved that to 5 units already. Nobody, if it's difficult to make it financially viable at 10, it's going to be almost impossible to make it viable at 5. So you pretty much kill the usage of that site next to it for anybody other than the person who's purchased the other half, if they so wanted it.
Okay. Are there any further questions for Councillor Eyre? Councillor Jane Burton.
Just regarding that last point that you made about splitting it into two and making it so it would lose its value. do you have a business case done for that to say that that's actually the case? Because I think some properties are split into two to make more money for the seller. It's just something that occurred to me.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne, and that's the precise point of the calling. That information should have been part of the executive paper for them to understand what the impact on the valuation. That's not for me to do. I'm aware that it's quite clear to anyone with a semi-detached property that that the value as a detached property is significantly higher than two semi-detached. But that's the precise evidence. There's nothing in here for members of the public or anybody on this committee to know what the financial impact is. The valuation in 2020, and that was an old valuation, it was about 2019 valuation, was 2 million across the whole site. That's a 4-year-old valuation, so that will be significantly more. So if you wipe 20% off the value of 4 million, that's a considerable amount of money to lose. And we don't know that information. Information isn't there. That information wasn't presented to executive, and nobody had the opportunity to analyse that.
And sorry, I thought that you said that it would decline the value of the property. That's what you'd actually said, but I may have misunderstood you.
I said, in my opinion, and common sense will tell you that it definitely would. The amount it would impact upon, I don't know. I mean, the value of the second half plummets once you sell first, because the buyer of half of it, if they wish to buy the second half, are in an incredibly strong position at that point, as nobody else probably wants it. So they can then start to reduce it and say, well, actually, that was worth 2 million when it was an open market sale. However, I'm going to give you 1.2 because nobody else wants it anymore, because I have the other half. We've all played Monopoly.
Okay. Councillor Rowley, you haven't spoken.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor, I just want to come back to the shambles. You mentioned in your submissions that you have reams of paper with you, and in terms of disposal, you would expect a 20-page document to give some form of justification. You also mentioned that there was a cost to prepare those. Having held the executive post recently, what would the cost of a typical report like that be?
That's a good question. I couldn't possibly answer that to you, but the cost of not producing it definitely is in the hundreds of thousands of pounds.
A ballpark figure.
Generally wouldn't have a clue.
Okay, so
Red book valuations are
when
fairly
you were an
standard.
executive member, you were authorising reports that you had no idea or no clue as to how much they were costing to prepare. So that's an interesting.
There is not a single property developer that does not have a red book valuation done of a property when they come to sell it.
But you should have some ballpark figure of how much they cost. Anyway,
I don't know how much it costs to lay a brick either.
Leaving that aside.
I still let the housing.
Leaving that aside, it's clear in the report that I have here that the current registered providers of the properties in shambles were typically not interested in that type of accommodation. So to keep that on the books as affordable housing with a supplier who was registered to provide that affordable housing, stating it's not in their interests to keep it, I'm struggling to find where the disposal of such an asset wouldn't be a right thing to do in terms of in terms of kind of making sure that whatever disposal and whatever income from the disposal is then used for other affordable housing. I'm struggling to find your argument as to why the shambles should be retained.
Pretty much every single planning application that comes before this council, the developer will state that it's not desirable, not intentional to provide affordable housing on that particular site, and will argue their 20% down to the very minimal they can. That is what businesses do. Businesses are doing that to make a profit. They will argue that down. That is a role of the local authority to say we are not purely profit driven. We believe that. So yes, clearly it is more expensive to provide affordable housing on sites like that. It's much easier to do it elsewhere. And that's a decision that the executive need to take and need to have all the evidence and all the finances to say, is the financial difference on this site so significant that we're prepared to socially cleanse an entire street for that financial receipt? That's a decision the executive can take. If they wish to take it, they can take that, but they should know what that particular cost is when making that decision. And the public, whose land it is, let us not forget, this is not the executive's land, this is not the councillor's land, this is the public's land, and that decision is being taken. They had a right to know what the financial difference is. As with Castle Mills, where it's been decided it is, where it's not financially viable on Castle Mills, but we're still doing it anyway, they have the right to have the same information and input to that decision.
I just two things finally.
Briefly, I've got a few more hands, so if you.
Sorry, it's a supplementary. I had my hand up, Chair, but
No, it's
you're
fine.
looking elsewhere. So just a couple of things from me on that. You've used a very emotive word, social cleansing, which I think is not helpful in this instance. But secondly, the providers of that very type of accommodation have said in the report, they're not interested in that type of accommodation because of the reasons that they've mentioned there, particularly difficulties with access and other issues as well. So I just think, sometimes we need to be careful what language we use. Thank you, Chair.
Was that a question? Sorry. No. Okay, Councillor Widdowson.
So listening to what you're saying, Councillor Eyre, and the crux of the call-in is we need more evidence. So we've got a table that we're not allowed to talk about, and I won't, that's in the confidential annex that is 6 lines by 2. And what you're asking is the decision may be right, but based on the evidence in front of us, the decision can't be verified because we're talking millions of pounds. We're talking access to jobs for people in social housing in the middle of town who may prefer to live in the middle of town rather than live somewhere else. We've got a bigger decision to make than based on the 12 lines that we've got. That is the crux of what you're saying versus, I don't know how many pages you've got there, and the 40 pages that you were talking about at Castle Mills and the 20 pages that Councillor Pavlovic might have. Am I hearing correctly?
Yeah, like I said in my speech, 122 words for 2 incredibly sensitive and important sites for the city. 122 words, no figures. I say that there are arbitrary figures in there that aren't evidenced in any way. Nothing in there that makes a decision. As I say, and I said in my speech, and I agree with Councillor Pavlovic and Councillor Crawshaw and Councillor Myers said at the last call-in, may well be the right decision. The fact of the matter is nobody in this room, and certainly the members of the public, know that to be the case. We know how much affordable housing costs on different sites and the value of having those sites across there. We don't know on these particular 2 sites what that difference is, what that differential is, and whether or not that is worth it in terms of social value.
So we've got a minute and a half left. I've got one more hand. So Councillor Rose.
Oh, I just wanted to very quickly check that this confidential paper that we've got here is the thing that you think every single member of the public should know. I just wanted to clarify that.
Take me more than a minute and a half to answer that one. I think members of the public should have the full valuation. I think it is ridiculous that we're not allowed to talk about the difference of what that is. I mean, it's very simple. Members of the public, the millions that are watching now on YouTube will not be aware we're talking about, but there is a table that says if we sell this below market value, it's worth this. If we sell it for market value, it's worth that. I think as a bare minimum, the public should know that information and should have that information to hand. As a rule of thumb, we can all work it out. When I was trying to deal with getting as much information to the public as possible, I would always say the fact that officers would let me say it's about a 50% reduction in value. So anybody who's out there can look at what the value of a particular site would be, and it's generally about 50% less if you sell it for affordable housing. So anyone can work it. But yes, I think everybody should have access to as much of the full valuations as they possibly could, but they should definitely have access to the differential in price between what's being sold and what's being sold.
15 seconds.
Yeah, my final supplementary is, do you not think that information was available and just wasn't in these papers because these are public papers? That exact amount of information.
It's just a table. I mean, members of the public would be absolutely staggered to find that was just a table. It's not referenced. It doesn't even tell you where the figures have come from. It's just, here are 12 numbers. No evidence of where they came from. No.
Time's up, I'm afraid. Thank you very much. Councillor Eyre, you may now return to the public gallery. So I shall now invite Councillor Pavlovic and Councillor Lomas. You have 10 minutes collectively to respond to the grounds for the call-in. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start and Councillor Pavlovic will fill in much of the detail. I just want to make a couple of points. As Councillor Eyre has helpfully pointed out, there is information in the public report which details the business case for the decision that was made. I have a couple of quick points to make on the 22 The Avenue property. We are choosing to retain operationally useful annex that we are using for supported housing. We are not halving the value of the property arbitrarily. We are using half of the property, and therefore naturally the value of the half that we are choosing to sell will reduce because it's not as much as the whole. That seems to me to be basic maths. So we are choosing to retain operationally useful supported accommodation. That is what we're doing. We are selling a property that it would be difficult for us to put to use, and where registered providers have told us they don't have the demand for it. In the shambles, I want to be really clear. We have high standards for our affordable housing, high standards in terms of accessibility, high standards in terms of the cost of living in those properties, not just what rent you pay, but how much you pay to heat and light your home, how much you pay to live there. The shambles properties are, by their very nature, historic properties. Access to them is difficult. They cannot be made accessible. They cannot meet the high standards that we have for affordable housing. So therefore, we are deciding, having, had the experience of a registered provider pass them back because they don't want to, and they cannot make them work as safe and decent homes by affordable housing standards. So we're choosing to dispose of them so that we can focus our affordable housing on the land that we are selling for development, where we can build safe, decent homes that are cheap to live in for people who need it most. In the city centre at Castle Mills, just around the corner from the shambles. So I think that saying there is no business case is patently untrue, because there is a business case provided in the papers and information in the private papers. And I think that this is the notion of social cleansing is just abhorrent, frankly. In fact, what we're doing is exactly the opposite. We want a better standard of home for affordable housing than is able to be provided in this historic set of buildings.
Thank you, Councillor Lomas. I confess to being a tad nonplussed at this call-in. If there was ever a case of don't do as we do as we say, it's this call-in. Those properties that were presented to the previous administration, Councillor Eyre being the exec member for finance, when the housing association passed them over because they couldn't fill them, because they couldn't take anybody in there, because they were totally unsuitable as social housing, they just allowed them to stay empty. No plan, no idea what to do with them. So they're not suitable for social housing. We tested whether there was any other RP that would be interested. No RPs were interested in it. Therefore, what would we rather do with it? Leave them to deteriorate even further, or make a decision to dispose of them? We made a decision to dispose of them. That was the advice that we got. That was the advice that we took. As Councillor Lomas has said, that is outlined in the business case. The red book will be basically what the offer is compared to what the valuation that our assets people and the estate agents have given. 22 The Avenue, again, a decision was made when the property was empty by the last administration to dispose of that asset. Councillor Lomas has said, and it's reiterated on paragraph 62, that the annex is supported housing and will remain supported housing. Therefore, it's a building that has been allowed for 5 years to deteriorate to the state that it could not be viably converted. Therefore, again, a decision was made. What is the best value? And that is the core role of an administration. Might not have been the last administrations, but it's certainly this administration, is to get best value for its money. We would rather invest our assets in good quality, genuine social housing. That's what we're doing at Castle Mills. It's what we'll be doing at Ordnance Lane. It's what we'll be doing at Willow House. 100% affordable housing. I think that's probably as much as I need to say. Is there anything that I've missed that you want to add? No? I'm open to you.
Sorry, we now move into questions for the executive members, and again, we will have up to 20 minutes for questions. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, a question for each of you, if that's okay. A question to you, Michael, about the fact that you previously called in the previous decision, and just whether you are feeling conflicted by the current situation, whether you have whether things have changed enough for this to be black and white, or whether there is any thought on that. And then a question for you, Katie, about the business case for the split of the avenue. I guess the question in the call-in was, should there have been a business case for retaining both halves and selling them as one later versus selling half now? What are your thoughts about that version of business case?
Thank you. Can I go first?
You can.
Call-in requested for options to be provided. Options are provided. It's not suitable for social housing. Therefore, what do we do with it? We're keeping the annex. That is supported housing. We are not going to decamp people from the supported housing in which they are living and settled to then realise it as a more profitable asset. But we've got one asset that is deteriorating and has been allowed to deteriorate over a period of years, so it's better to sell it. We asked for options. We've got the options. We were given the options. We got a recommendation that came to executive, and we followed that recommendation.
Yeah, thanks for that. I cannot see how there could be a business case to retain an empty building that we are not able to use for an unspecified amount of time that we will need the annex as supported housing. I cannot see how anybody would even think, even on a basic common sense level, that would be right to leave a property empty and deteriorating for 5 years, as it already has been, never mind an unspecified further length of years, when you could dispose of it. I don't understand why anyone would want a business case on that. And I think one of the things about a business case is they don't look at absolutely everything. They look at things that are viable for that site. So they don't, for example, look at, could you make it into a supermarket? Of course they don't, because that wouldn't be viable for that site. They don't look at, could it be a train station? Of course they don't, because that wouldn't be viable for that site. And leaving a building empty, decaying and deteriorating, I don't think anybody would agree is the right thing to do. And us not having a use for it without considerable investment because of the way that it's deteriorated, but also because of, again, the age and nature of the building means that we were looking at viable options for the site.
Thank you. Just a supplementary on that. Looking at the previous decision relating to the avenue, that was on the basis of a whole site sale and reprovision. And I hear what you say in terms of not wanting to unsettle people who are in the supported living element. But was there in terms of the information you commissioned or were presented with, was there an analysis of if you wanted to re-provide that accommodation elsewhere, then the site as a whole would be worth X as opposed to an assessment of what it'd be worth in two halves, or was that? Yeah, I just wondered whether that was information that had been either requested or produced.
We have not asked for a business case for throwing people out of supported accommodation, which is suitable for them. We have not asked for a business case for that. I'm more than happy to say that. We are informed it is suitable for its current use and therefore it remains in its current use.
Thank you. I've got next Councillor Healy. Microphone.
First, before I get onto my main questions. On page 33 of the agenda, paragraph 64, last sentence, it says, there is therefore continuing need for the annex building until alternative provision is provided. So this is 22 the Avenue. In the following page, 66, again, the last sentence, while the annex is retained until such time as the service finds a new location from which to operate. So are there any plans, is there any work ongoing to move the provision that's currently provided by the annex? Because this document certainly implies that there is, whereas what I've heard today would imply that there isn't.
Thank you. We're certainly not. Yes, if there was a suitable alternative provision that was better than the existing property, it would be a recommendation that social care would bring to us. They haven't done that, nor have we requested it. As far as we're concerned, that is an extant use. There is no alternative provision. Nobody's suggesting that there can be an appropriate provision. They want to continue to use it, so therefore we will continue to use it.
Thank you.
I'll come back.
Okay.
Councillor Melly was next.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the properties on the shambles, because it's clear from the report that social rent isn't viable either by the council or a registered provider. But I was just wondering whether any other affordable tenure options were looked at before making the decision to dispose them at market value. So kind of shared ownership or sale at 80% of market value or anything like that, which would still meet the policy of affordable housing on council land, even if social rent isn't a viable option.
Who'd like to have a go at that one?
Thank you. It's an incredibly tight balancing act. The council have got a responsibility to, particularly given its very precarious financial position, to get best value. And the recommendation that we had was that best value would be a market sale. And so that's the decision that we were asked to consider. That was the decision that we took.
Okay. Carry on.
Just to add to Councillor Pavlovic's answer, I also think that it's important to understand that we're disposing of these properties leasehold, and I'm sure everyone's aware that there are significant concerns out in the housing world at the moment about leasehold domestic properties and the difficulties that can pose. We are disposing of them leasehold because of their historic significance to the city, and so it's not as simple as these are some really great flats that we could have used for another purpose. They're not great flats. They're difficult to access. There are issues around their construction, the way they are constructed. There are issues around noise because of where they are. There are issues around fire and issues around smells because of their location and their construction. And so we decided that this is not the kind of standard of accommodation that we want to provide as affordable housing. We want to provide really, really good quality, affordable housing that's safe and decent and cheap to live in, not just anything, any room goes. So I think that those were the things that we held in the balance here.
Can I, just a quick supplementary, in terms of you mentioned it's the leasehold rather than the freehold it's being sold. Does that just relate to the shambles and the avenue would be a freehold disposal? Okay. A supplementary, yeah.
So in answer to Councillor Kelly's question, the answer is...
Councillor
Sorry, Councillor, I can't, sorry, it's my eyesight. Apologies, Councillor Melly. Apologies. So in answer to the question, the answer is no. It was no to social housing, and it was yes to selling on the open market because they're difficult to bring to standard. We've got other difficult properties, if my memory is right, Councillor Pavlovic, on Bell Farm, where we're spending £70,000 or £80,000 per flat to bring them to a standard that is acceptable. Has that calculation been put together with the 4 or 5 homes on the shambles that could be brought to the same amount and then possibly sold through the various different mechanisms that the councillor was talking about? Because that, I think, is the crux of what the calling is what are the options?
All we can do here is repeat the advice from officers, and this might be a moment to get the officers to elaborate on that because of the nature of the construction of the properties on the shambles, because of issues around access, which we cannot change, we cannot change the construction of them. We cannot change the layout. We cannot change the access arrangements. We cannot change the fact that because of the nature of their construction, they allow noise and smells in a way that can't be altered, that they could not be made to that standard. I don't believe that to be the case for the flats on Bell Farm, but you might want officers to give some technical information on that, because I'm not aware of the Bell Farm properties.
Yeah. And the thing about the Bell Farm, the thing about Bell Farm properties is there are people living there, and when there are not people living there, they are part of the capital voids programme. But Patrick can talk about the advice, the financial advice that was given to us.
So I'm conscious I've got a number of hands. So if you want to briefly add to what's already been said.
Yeah, if I can, I'll be quick on this one. There's a fundamental difference between Bell Farm and the shambles. Bell Farm is housing revenue account land, and therefore it's the housing revenue account that needs to do the maintenance on those properties. The shambles and the avenue are both general fund assets, so we would have to use general fund borrowing, which would have to go through the revenue budget in those regards. So there'd be different decisions from members.
Okay, but briefly.
I can just ask a point of clarity. My understanding is that the money that is being spent on the Bell Farm is through the retrofit programme that was provided by the Mayor and isn't anywhere else. So I'm obviously mistaken, Patrick.
No, there's a small proportion of Bell Farm being funded through the Mayor, but the majority of it's coming through from capital receipts that are being made through the housing revenue account through sales of other houses. So if we were to take these sites and move them into the housing revenue account, the housing revenue account would effectively have to change borrowing there'd have to be an appropriation between the sites. The HRA would therefore pick up a significant amount of debt. The amount of money that could be made through rents through the HRA would make those unviable from the HRA perspective. Obviously there's political decisions, and that's where I'll leave you guys to make those decisions. But from a financial perspective, it would put pressure on the HRA, which therefore something else would have to give. So that's why that wasn't put forward as an option on these sites. And also, yeah, I think that's just
Okay.
typical.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the shambles, it's almost 100 years since the council purchased them. So I'm surprised that there's so little information in relation to the decision to dispose of them. And in terms of how this fits with a broader picture of what the council wishes to do in the shambles area, how does what's proposed here fit with a broader picture of this important part of the city and how it will operate in the future, recognising that it was purchased in order to stop it being demolished, because at that time the most prompt way of dealing with the materials, the building materials, was to knock it down and build again. But since then, technology has moved on, and there have been a number of examples where pilots were proposed in the city centre on difficult buildings to demonstrate that they could be brought into living above the shop use to fit with an economic strategy for the city centre. Thank you, Chair.
Who'd like to have a go at that?
I think we've probably already covered the issue about the historic importance by the fact that we are disposing of these on a leasehold basis, not a freehold basis, because of their historic importance. I absolutely look forward to seeing what whoever purchases the properties does to try to bring them into modern use. I hope that they do a brilliant job in that. Very exciting times for them to be brought back into use.
Thank you. Councillor Healy, you were next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. In the last financial year, a decision was taken on Castle Mills to not build the car park on what's the site called? Anyway, it doesn't matter what it was called. So that capital has now had to be repaid by revenue. You're now selling off the Castle Mills site, so we're now going to have to. Okay, well, the reason I'm actually asking this is for the sake of fullness and going back to the business case. I would have a very strong suspicion that the amount of money I believe has so far been spent on the Castle Mill site is in excess of £4 million. Given the fact that you've now got rid of the car park and you've now got rid of the flats, the only bit you've kept is the entertainment space.
Is this context for a question about
the other
sites we're talking about?
So on the financial information, are these positives for Castle Mills actually negatives, as we're going to have to take out the revenue account all those pre-spent capitalised costs?
It's not part of the call-in, so we can't answer.
It's not a question about 22 the Avenue or
No.
shambles, then I'm afraid we can't.
We are allowed to take account of all matters 4C, which includes Castle Mills.
No.
No,
So,
don't even talk about Castle Mills.
no. Are there any further questions for the executive members? Councillor Fisher.
That very statement, which
Can you bring your microphone around the front?
sorry, yeah, refer to that very point at the bottom of page 50, which is ground 4C, which is the opinion of our monitoring officer. It is the case that no disposal business case would present to the meeting in respect to the shambles and avenue sites. Such business cases would doubtless have contained additional information and justification for the recommendations presented and for discounting other possibilities. Now, I speak as somebody who's had a hell of a lot of experience in disposal of council assets, not just a few houses in shambles and 2 properties on the avenue, but 3,700 council houses transferred in the early 90s to a housing association. That business case was gone over in enormous detail because of the obligation of the council to achieve the best outcome for the residents. Now, by your monitoring officer's statement, you have not gone through that business case. Can you justify that, please, now?
I think it's patently clear that there is nothing in the papers that is titled business case. However, in my view, there is a business case presented in the papers. And in fact, all council papers are essentially a business case for the decision that you're making, giving information, giving officers advice as to how to make that decision. Respectfully, Councillor Fisher, to your experience, every single paper we look at is a business case. Every single paper that we look at has information to help us make decisions, whatever decision we're making. And it is, you know, perhaps learning for the future for officers in drafting reports that they make sure that they make it clear. I maintain that there is a business case for the decisions that were made, and how we made them. And I'm, you know, obviously at this point, sitting in this calling, I do wish that officers had titled one of the paragraphs business case, and then that would have made it absolutely clear. But there is a business case presented.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our 20 minutes, I'm afraid. Thank you, members. Thank you, executive members, for taking those questions. Thank you for officers. You are now free to return to the public gallery. Okay, so we now move into the summing up phase. So if I can invite Councillor Eyre to return to the table, please, with your pile of papers. And okay, so you have up to 5 minutes to make any concluding remarks. So in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. I'll endeavour to be brief. In terms of response to Councillor Pavlovic, who said that what we're doing is getting best value for the site, and that's not what happened previously. That is precisely what happened previously as part of a different decision. A decision he didn't agree with, and he argued at the time that it shouldn't be about getting best value. It should be about getting social value. Councillor Lomas's comments that business cases only look at what's viable. I think there's been a misunderstanding of what business cases are here today. Business cases don't only look at what is viable. The whole point of the business case is to assess whether something's viable. The papers I've got here tell you which options were viable and which options weren't viable. That's the evidence you use to make a decision. You don't just say, well, it's not viable, therefore we're not going to progress that particular option. We've had it repeated over and over again, and Councillor Fisher made the point that I was already going to make, that there is a business case. The business case is clear. Apparently it needed to be highlighted. The monitoring officer, as Councillor Fisher said quite clearly in his opinion on this call-in, that there was not adequate business case. There was not options. That fact is absolutely true. And looking into that, there was questions about alternative provision for 22 The Avenues. There was option that the plan is to eventually replace 22 The Avenues. As far as I understand, that is still ongoing. The sale of this asset would have an impact on that particular thing. So, for example, if an alternate site was provided, it may be necessary to raise capital from 22 The Avenues to fund the replacement facility. That's not there. The impact of that there, whether or not that makes any alternate provision unviable because the capital receipt is no longer available, is just one of the many options that's not contained in there. A lot of conversation about the registered provider saying shambles is not viable. That's based on the model that exists today, as the council, as owner of the land, leasing that to somebody, and then them saying, under that circumstances, nothing here tells you that if you gave the land to that housing provider, that they would actually be able to make it viable. That was not an option that was taken. The option saying that they didn't want to continue as is having the land owned by the council, leasing it from the council, and then subletting it. That's the issue that wasn't viable. Nobody around this table can say, well, as with the Castle Mill site, if the site was given over or sold for nominal sum, whether or not it would suddenly become viable. In reality, it's been a very bizarre call-in, having listened around. Nobody has a clue. Nobody really knows what's going on. We're all speculating on what the value of the land is, what the potential options would be. That is the reason why the call-in was accepted by the monitoring officer, because there just is not the level of detail and information for anybody to make a reasoned decision on whether or not, and as I said before, and agreeing with the call-in that was said by Councillor Corshaw and Councillor Myers at the time, it may well be the right thing. I don't know. I could sit and say it may well be the right thing to do in terms of doing that one, but we just don't know. The information is not there. And I will remind you all on this side of the table, particularly, of the promise you made to residents at the election, which was to deliver 100% affordable on council land. Paragraph 7 of this report says, where sites are not considered appropriate for affordable housing delivery, then the council has and will seek best value for its assets, which are surplus, to aid the council's delivery. And we heard about a tight balancing act. None of that was in your literature. None of that was in your leaflets. Your pledge was 100% affordable on council land, not 100% affordable on council land, unless we decide it's not appropriate, in which case we'll sell it to the highest bidder.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. Councillor Lomas, Councillor Pavlovic, you have up to 5 minutes for any concluding remarks you wish to make.
And there, in a nutshell, colleagues, is why we're £12 million overdrawn. A council's responsibility is to deliver its best practice, its best value. We were given a very clear choice. Nobody wants these properties. Nobody wants to take them on as social housing or affordable housing. It would cost a fortune to develop them. I could give them away, or we could give them away. A massive value asset to that. Now that'd get called in, I can guarantee you that, for nothing. We have to balance how best we spend the money that comes into this council. The money that we can receive from these two assets would deliver far more quantum numbers of affordable housing. That's the trade-off that we took. That's what we're going to do. So that's the decision that we were asked to make, and that's why we made the decision. It's a clear business case. Nobody wants it. Nobody can make it add up. It's better to sell it, and therefore the best value that you're going to get is to sell it for market value. And, you know, I've heard some gibberish today. For example, you could put student housing on 22 The Avenue, or you could put a supermarket on 22 The Avenue. Have you seen how big it is? It's madness. No, it was, no. You said, has there been a business case for selling it as a hotel, or selling it as a supermarket, or selling it as student? No, you wouldn't, because there has been no point in doing it.
In the final minute, I will just say, we are maintaining our pledge to build affordable housing when we sell council land for development. And that's what we are working so hard to do at Castle Mills, where we can develop decent quality, properly affordable housing. When we have assets, property assets that are not land, that we need to dispose of, then we make disposal decisions that maximise our ability to provide a genuinely affordable housing everywhere else.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to the next phase of the meeting, where I invite members of the committee to make any comments or contributions they wish to make on the matter at hand. And if you do wish to speak, you'll have a maximum of 5 minutes to have your say. Would anybody like to say anything?
We'll do this in order.
Sorry? No, you're getting way ahead of yourself.
Oh,
yes. Yes. Oh no, there's more fun to come. Would anybody like to make any comments or observations on what they've said? If not, I was going to say I'll start, but I'll let Councillor Rose start.
Yeah, previous call and I took notes and I ordered it and I wrote an actual thing to say to make sure I was on time and went through the points, but I just have a disdain for this coming before us today that means that I haven't prepped anything. Just picking up the point around the manifesto pledge. I've got the manifesto pledge in front of us on the website. It's been on the website since before the election. It says when the council builds, 100% of new homes will be affordable. It's been there for 18 months. I've had it in my inbox. I've got private papers from way before the election that says the exact same wording. It has been very crystal clear. Not the point of the call in, not relevant to that, but just since he's made the comment. On the actual stuff here, it was said that it was unclear. People here don't know what's going on. What's going on is very straightforward. We've got a property on the shambles here that is clearly inaccessible and says so in the paper, that is clearly not viable to the people who we want to provide it, to the RPs, that it says in the paper. And we have another site where we have three options. We keep the whole thing and let half of it continue to depreciate in value, and hope that when we eventually sell both parts together, it somehow hasn't depreciated more than if we just sell half now, which is obviously not true. Or we sell half of it, or we kick a bunch of people out and sell the whole thing. And that is not only transparently obvious without even looking at the paper, but it says it in the paper. It says that it's not viable as affordable housing. It says that it's not fit for standard, that the quality is really poor. And releasing these assets is a no-brainer, common sense business case in its own right. I slightly disagree with Katie's point about the lack of a business case here. I think there is a lack of a detailed line-by-line, multi-page business case. That is the point that they're making. I also disagree that the MO in any way is expressing an opinion that it is a problem, that it's missing, that all that's here is saying that it's a viable call-in. And I think that the MO, if present, would strongly disagree with the idea that there is a sentiment behind it. But also, it says in the MO's report, the report is clear that 22 The Avenue is neither suitable nor required for operational purposes. It's in poor condition and requiring full refurbishment. The report is also clear that given its size and condition, it is not considered financially viable for affordable housing. And those are the points that we've got back tonight on the other half. Those points have already been dismissed by the MO. So I'm just quite furious that I'm wasting an entire evening here on a ridiculous bit of a call-in. I appreciate the original call-in and what it was trying to achieve. I appreciate the point that you've made this evening about, when you get these large sales of land, you do have to have copious business cases. It's very different when it's one property that is just not financially viable. And what should have happened is when you were left with these tiny bits of the call-in should have been ditched, because the bits of the call-in you wanted to speak about, as evidenced by speaking about it anyway, are the bits that aren't actually viable to talk about this evening. So, I mean, that's my opinion on pretty much everything that's been said today.
Thank you very much. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. A point that I was not able to bring up that I would just like members of this committee to consider: the flat above the reading cafe in Roundtrees Park was not suitable to be used for affordable or social housing. And we seem to be mixing the terms up a lot lately. So I'll say social housing, because that's what I think we're all striving to achieve. The flats at the shambles, I would suggest, fall into a very similar category, that they're not suitable for affordable or social housing. And in this case, we're going to sell them on a very, very long lease. Now, coming back to Councillor Rose's point that the shambles is the second most expensive street in the United Kingdom, I'd broaden that to say the shambles is probably in the top 10 most recognisable streets in the entire world. And the best that this council can do is sell it off as an asset. And the money that will generate, because this is not in the housing revenue account, so this money is not going to go to create additional social or affordable housing. It's just going to go into the amorphous council budget, which we have heard is £12 million overdrawn, mixing revenue and capital again. If someone is going to come along and offer us a nice tidy sum for something that we've heard is basically dilapidated, we can't do anything with, surely it's not beyond the wit of this council to actually rent those out in a similar manner to we're already doing, which I understand is quite successfully, in Roundtrees Park. Why would we not want the revenue? Why would we accept, which is actually quite a small amount of capital. If you actually look at the capital estimations, these one-bedroom flats, they're not dissimilar from other one-bedroom flats, slight premium, but not a huge amount. So coming back to Councillor Ayre's point, I would have expected to see something in here that said, this is a capital C, we can't do it for social housing, however, we can get this amount of money for rental.
You, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. To Councillor Rose, it doesn't matter whether it's a large scale development or a small scale development. Every single sale of public land or assets should be properly evidenced, not just relying on officer opinion. That's government guidance. Because if you're arguing we should just accept officer recommendations, then, well, I'd be delighted because we won't have 7 hours of planning meetings anymore. We'll just vote on the officer recommendation without any evidence or anything else. And we won't have to sit there discussing it, looking at consultations and so on. The fact is, you can't dethrone an officer. You must have the background evidence. It must be actually clearly financially laid out why the sale of the asset, the disposal of the assets is valid and how it will benefit the public. And that hasn't happened in this case. So I'm sorry, I can't accept your logic.
Okay. A few comments from me. I think we've unpacked quite a bit of information through this discussion in terms of housing revenue account, general fund interplay, which I think were things that probably could and should have been played out in the report. Not having seen the flats above the shambles, I find it quite difficult to have a firm view as to whether I think that's completely, that is no longer fit for purpose in terms of, quite rightly, the standards that we do set for new or retrofit homes. But it it does seem as though I would like to have seen more information, whether it was badged as a business case or options appraisal. I think something could have been produced. It wouldn't have needed to have included detailed figures that potentially veered into commercial in confidence, but in terms of what are the options, and we've discussed some of them here tonight, and why those options were discounted. And we may have all come to the same conclusion. And we know from previous work that was done in relation to the avenue and thinking back to the call-in meeting that I was part of then, we may have come to a similar conclusion. So I think it's unfortunate that more information wasn't provided to give a degree of sort of assurance that all options had been seriously considered. And as I said, we're not here to say the decision is wrong for these reasons. It's trying to understand the basis for the decision. I think that's what we've, in a roundabout way, kind of helpfully unpacked some of that. Councillor Burton.
I just wanted to say, because Rantry Park is in my ward, that the flat and the conversion of the Park Keepers Lodge didn't go ahead in Rantry Park because it was going to cost £500,000, and so it wasn't viable because the idea was to have it as an Airbnb. So it was decided, and it's empty at the moment. There's the library on the first floor at where the balcony is, and at the moment it's in the process of potentially becoming a community asset and being converted into a communal space for the community, the local community. So I don't know where you got the idea of it being a flat and being converted, but it hasn't, because it wasn't viable. No, okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
That's okay.
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I thought this was probably the right time to say it as we come hopefully towards a close at this point. But I do appreciate that the calling would happen and that party politics can often infect that. But I do think some of the language that has been used is hyperbolic and sometimes quite inflammatory. Having references to things like social cleansing has just, I think, lowered the tone quite a lot of what we were discussing here. We need to discuss the issues, and it's right that we use the process effectively to scrutinise the council, and the opposition will scrutinise the main party. But I've never treated any other councillor with anything other than the utmost respect, and I've always tried my best to do that. And to hear phrases like that thrown around, particularly in this climate, I just thought it was important to raise that point and to say perhaps if we were able to conduct this with a little bit more respect and decorum for fellow councillors, I think would be good. My peace and love Hollywood speech over, but I thought it was important to say.
Thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
Councillor Whitcroft, I would completely agree with you, but I think there's been inflammatory language from across the table. So for Councillor Lomas to use some of the phraseology that she used during her speech, I think that was probably part of what has caused different people to say different things. Across the piece, I absolutely agree with you, and I wish, this is, I know, slightly out of context, I wish that all council meetings, especially full council, people would really mind their P's and Q's, because some of the language that we are delivering to each other, I would be telling my children off for, and they're 22 and 28, and I find it abhorrent, some of the language that is used in our public forums. I really do find it abhorrent.
Okay, would anybody like to add any further comments on the calling matters we've been discussing? Councillor Merritt.
I'd perhaps partly echo your comments, Chair. I think in terms of the basic paper that we were looking at, it is a stretch to say that it does meet Article 7 of the Constitution, but we have, as a result of this afternoon's meeting, obtained both from the executive members but also from the officers, I think, sufficient explanation in terms of the background considerations which clearly did take place in terms of the different options. And I think the other thing we do have to bear in mind in terms of the principles of decision making is the requirement to be proportionate. If we were selling off 1,371 houses, I could understand that we would have an all singing, all dancing business case. I think the point has been reasonably made about the proportionateness in terms of the two sites that we are looking at this afternoon. So I think we have now satisfied the requirements of the Constitution, and I don't think we should approve this call-in, but I do hope the executive members will take away trying to make sure that officers perhaps are fuller in terms of the explanation of the background and options that have been considered and dismissed in terms of future papers like this.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. I'm not seeing any other indications, so we now move to the point that you've been clearly eager to get to, Councillor Healy, which is where I will ask members to indicate whether they believe there has been a breach or no breach of the decision-making principles. And I shall go in alphabetical order, beginning with Councillor Ben Burton.
No breach.
Thank you. Councillor Jane Burton.
No breach.
Councillor Fisher.
Breach.
Councillor Healy.
Breach.
Councillor Melly.
No breach.
Councillor Merritt.
No breach.
Councillor Rose.
No breach.
Councillor Rowley.
No breach.
Councillor Waller.
Breach.
Councillor Widdowson.
Breach.
Councillor Wilson.
No breach.
Councillor Whitcroft.
No breach.
And me, breach. So that is 5 members considering there has been a breach and 8 members considering there's been no breach. We'll now do it all again by show of hands as required by the Constitution. So, one more time, people. All those who believe there has been a breach, please show your hands. 5. And can I see all those who believe there has been no breach? 8. Good. Numbers add up. So the conclusion of the committee is there has been no breach in the decision-making principles. So that brings the meeting to a close with just one last thing for us to consider, which is whether in the course of our discussion there have been any issues raised that would be worthy of further exploration via the scrutiny function. Is this in response to what I've just said? Okay, Councillor Widdowson.
I think what would be really useful, 2 points. One, scoping out what a business case looks like, because there are several online. And when I was in business, we used to use the McKinsey one. So I think there should be a template for what a business case looks like so that all options are considered, not everything to the very last end, but all major options. So I think we need to look at how we process business cases. And one thing I'm slightly disappointed by in the meeting is we keep saying it's the officers didn't do all the work. The officers pull their report to the executive, and the executive looks at that, takes that information and asks the questions on it. So do we need something in our scrutiny committee that looks at that relationship, why it's either not being presented or why it's not being asked for?
I don't think that's really a scrutiny function. That's more a officer member working relationship issue, but that's not really a scrutiny issue. In terms of business cases, I suppose I wouldn't necessarily expect all work done internally to be provided as part of a public report. I think there's an issue in terms of what information is published, to support a recommendation. That seems relatively non-controversial. It might refer to work that has been done, summarise the work that's been done, options reviewed. So I'll have a think about where that would best sit, because it really cuts across. It's not just in relation to housing; it potentially cuts across lots of areas of council business. So that's something that we can have a think. Are there any other issues arising from our discussion that people think are worthy of further exploration? Councillor Rose.
Yeah, so I mean, I echo that point, and it's a point that I've regularly raised at A&G, that I think the art of decisions and the art of exec and senior officers regularly comes into the public eye as a point of concern, but when it comes to audit, it has no discussion from certain people on the committee. And I think it would be wise for us to take the specific thing here that we seem to have a binary. Is there something that's big enough to warrant a massive business case, or we don't really need much? And I think that what we're lacking here is a bit of clarity over what circumstances should have what. And if we had something, as a policy statement or what else that said for a single property, this is the level of detail that's required, it would make all of our lives a lot easier. So I'd suggest that A&G considers for their future work plan looking at what we would expect in a decision to support that decision. I think it's an A&G thing, but if it's scrutiny, I'm fine with that as well. But I did also suggest this on previous discussions about decisions in the council. So I don't know what that committee will decide.
Probably a bit of a slow burn, but it's certainly worth pursuing. Anything else from anybody else? If not, thank you for your time this evening, and I wish you good night.